Hi, welcome to the Restorative Practices training at Robert T. Hill for the 2020-2021 school year. My name is Ellen Stroud. I am the Social Emotional Learning lead teacher for our campus, and I'm going to be guiding you through this webinar on restorative practices. So let's get started. Before we start, you will need a writing utensil and something to write on. Doesn't matter what it is. This is just for your personal use to complete a couple of written reflections during the presentation. So just take a moment to grab those things if you don't already have them. Our essential questions for this training are: what is restorative practices and why do we need it? And what will restorative practices look like at Robert T. Hill? So we'll start with the first section. I'm going to just give you a broad overview of what restorative practices means and why we need it at our campus. So in the context of education, restorative practices means a philosophy of education based on building positive relationships, so between staff and students and between students as well. Accountability, so holding students accountable for their actions and empowering students to hold themselves accountable as well. And repairing harm, so focusing less on the rule that has been broken in the school, but rather on repairing the harm that was caused by that action. So why do we need restorative practices? If you aren't familiar with the school to prison pipeline, this is a common metaphor that describes the ways in which students are pushed out of the education system and into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. And a lot of times this begins within schools. It starts with school exclusion policies, zero tolerance disciplinary codes. So when we're suspending students, expelling students, often for nonviolent offenses, then we're pushing them out of the classroom and pushing them closer towards incarceration. This type of disciplinary policy disproportionately affects minority and low-income populations. So poor students are much more likely to experience a criminalized school discipline system, even as early as elementary school. And the use of criminal justice tools as well for policing students in schools, where we use metal detectors, surveillance technology, and police officers in our schools. Our schools begin to mirror a prison setting, and this has been the traditional setup of schools for the last few decades, and the results have been really harmful. Students who have been suspended or expelled are twice as likely to drop out than students who have not. Black students are suspended or expelled 3 times more frequently than white students. And of the students disciplined in middle or high school, 23% end up involved in the juvenile justice system. And what's really shocking is that 95% of these suspensions each year come from nonviolent offenses, such as violating the dress code or what is interpreted as disrespectful behavior. And this is something we even noticed looking at our data at Hill, is that many of our referrals are occurring in the classroom for Tier 1 offenses, nonviolent offenses. And so we want to use restorative practices to address that. So in order to get an idea of what that would actually look like, here we have a tale of 2 schools. So let's take this hypothetical student, Carlos. He has a heated argument with his parents before leaving for school in the morning, so he's running late. So we'll look at the differences between the zero tolerance education system response and the restorative practices response. In the zero tolerance education system, Carlos is greeted by metal detectors and police search. Whenever he gets to class, he's late to his first period, and his teacher scolds him in front of the class. Carlos talks back and is given a detention. Later that day, Carlos gets into a minor altercation in the cafeteria. In the zero tolerance system, a school police officer detains and arrests both students. So then later that afternoon, Carlos is held in a juvenile detention facility. He misses school. He now has an arrest on his record and is facing suspension. If we take the flip side and look at the restorative practices-based education system with the same scenario, Carlos is greeted by teachers and administrators. They welcome him and his fellow students as they enter. When he's late to his first period, instead of scolding him in front of the class, his teacher waits until after class to speak with Carlos to learn more about why he was late and ends up setting a meeting with his school counselor. Later that day, when Carlos gets into a minor altercation, peer mediators and support staff intervene. The students sit down together and the situation is de-escalated. That afternoon, Carlos and the other student are still held accountable for their actions, and they agreed to help clean the cafeteria as a consequence. Later on, Carlos also meets with his counselor and parents after school to resolve the conflict at home. So you can see that in the restorative practices approach, the student is still held accountable for the behavior, but the educators are also attempting to get to the root of the issue so that the behavior doesn't occur again. So I have a quick write. I want you guys to just take a few minutes to respond to these two questions. Number 1 says, why do you think suspensions negatively impact student achievement? So data shows that suspensions impact student achievement academically and behaviorally in a negative way. So why do you think that is? And number 2, which students are most negatively impacted by zero tolerance policies? So you have about 2.5 minutes. I'm going to play some music while you write in response. If you don't want to listen to music, just feel free to mute during this time. Go ahead and wrap up your quick write response. And we're going to move on to the next section. The next section of this training answers the question, what will restorative practices look like at Hill this year? So what specific practices will we be implementing on campus this year? As I mentioned earlier, restorative practices is based on building positive relationships, holding students accountable, and repairing harm. We're going to have a lot of training on each of these in each of these areas in the future, but for the sake of just giving you guys a brief overview, today we're just going to focus on building positive relationships. When we look at our key practices at Hill, there are two things that we want to focus on. Number one is our respect agreements or social contracts, which we have already created as a staff. And then number two is community meetings or circles. And that's what we're going to focus on in the bulk of this training. The respect agreement, just like we created with our staff, this is what you will co-create with your students in order to come to a consensus about how everyone wants to be treated in your classroom. So this is the version that you will do with your students, and this resource will be sent out to you as well. Today we're going to focus mostly on community meetings or circles. So this is a practice that you can use to build relationships among students in your classroom and between you and the students in your classroom. This is a way to get to know your students a little bit better, and you can also use community meetings to address conflict within the classroom as well. So many of you may already be familiar with circles. We have been doing them at Hill for the last few years, but of course we have this new challenge of doing our teaching virtually and our learning virtually. So what I'm going to show you guys today is an example of what a community meeting would look like in a virtual setting. As you watch the video, I want you to think about the following questions. What are the norms and expectations established by the teacher? And what strategies does the teacher use to help students feel comfortable sharing? So I'm going to show you a video of a virtual community meeting that I conducted with a handful of my students this summer. This is a condensed version of the meeting. I cut out most of the student responses in order to just highlight some of the key practices that I would want you guys to focus on. So I'm going to play the video. If you are already familiar with circles, you may not need to watch the whole video, but you may be interested just to see how it looks virtually. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time for all of the ums that you're going to hear from me during this video. All right, so again, y'all can take notes about these questions as you're watching. To reflect on that and circle. Okay. So this is a mood meter check-in that I conducted using Pear Deck, which we'll get training on later today. Awesome. So let's see how everybody's feeling. Tranquil, nice. Safe and calm. Well, I'm really, really happy to see that we're all in the green zone. I would also describe my mood as calm and tranquil and safe. I'm feeling good today too. So thank you guys for sharing that. All right, so we're going to do a circle today. Before we get started, I just want to review our circle expectation. So first of all, what is said in the circle stays in the circle. So we're going to, keep all the information shared today just between us. Of course, if there's ever something where I feel like you might be in danger to yourself or others, then I will have to report that information. But other than that, this is a safe space for us to share and keep it here. Can I actually get each of you to read the other expectations? Can someone read number 2 for me?
Speak from the heart.
Awesome. All right. So, yeah, basically that just means be honest. This is a safe space, so we should, try to push ourselves to even if it makes us a little, uncomfortable to talk about things that are, it makes us feel like vulnerable or emotional, that sometimes it feels good to share those things with other people. So this is a space for us to do that. And Javi, can you read number 3?
Listen actively and stay muted while others are sharing.
Perfect. And Leslie, can you read number 4?
Challenge by choice.
Okay, so basically what that means is you don't have to answer the questions. You're allowed to pass. If there's a question that makes you feel uncomfortable or you just don't feel like sharing, that is totally fine. But I am asking you to challenge yourself to respond. I myself am kind of shy and I don't always like sharing, but I realize that when I push myself to share, but I always feel better afterwards. So that's my challenge for you guys. So we're gonna get started. Before I ask any questions, I want you to type in your name. Just your first name, that's it. Ten more seconds. Awesome. Okay, so I had you do that because this is going to be the order that we go in for our circle. So it's going to be Evelyn, Leslie, Sama, nice, and Robin. I know you're not able to join, but you're going to be 4. Okay. So when I ask a question, Evelyn will answer. Then she'll pass it to Leslie. We'll pass it to Sama. My first question for you guys is just a silly question. Okay. If you could have a pet that was an exotic animal, okay, so this is not a dog or a cat or a hamster. I'm talking about a wild animal, okay, from some other part of the world, somebody that's not typically a pet. What kind of pet would you like to have? You can explain why, or you can just tell me the animal. It's up to you. I'm actually going to go first, and then I'll pass it to Evelyn. So for me, I think I would like to have a pet leopard. I just think they're so beautiful and majestic, and I would be a little terrified of it, but I don't know. Maybe I could like tame it or something, or maybe like raise it from birth, or I don't know. I would have to figure it out, but I think I'm gonna have to go with leopard. Go ahead, Evelyn. What kind of exotic animal pet would you choose?
I might choose a panda because they're like really cute and all that.
I think those are all pretty amazing choices. And what we're gonna do next is we're gonna move on to a few questions, and this is really a check-in to just see how you guys have been doing since the pandemic started. And what I want you to do is I'm actually going to give you a minute to answer these questions in your journal, just to actually write down your answers first. So I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes for that. And I really want you to just take some time to answer each question. And you are not going to have to share for all of them, but I do want you to at least think about your answers and write down your answers for all 4 questions. So I'm going to give you this time now. All right, we have 10 more seconds. Go ahead and wrap up your thoughts. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go in the same order, and I'm going to let you answer whatever question you want. Okay, so you could answer a couple of questions, or you could just pick one that you feel comfortable sharing. So just take a minute right now to decide which one you want to share your answer to. I'm going to start first, and then we'll let Evelyn go.
So I'll answer, I guess, 3 or 4 or 3, but I get informed about the coronavirus. Of course, I don't obviously read about it a lot, but I do know that you have to wear a mask, which is a good thing because people can finally smell their own breath. But besides that, I get it either from BBC or my dad, because he's always like through the internet, or my mom. She gets it from Facebook. And then I think I'll answer number one. So after like getting the news that it was closed, I thought, like Miss Chad said, it was going to be another week off of school. But little did I know that it was going to be for the whole school year. So I was kind of happy that we get one more week. So I was like, oh, okay, like I can maybe study or do something. But no, it was a whole year. It was kind of sad because I worked so hard to get to where I was, but Corona had to
together for sure. But yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing with me. Well, so we are going to close out the circle. I just have one more question before we finish. So this last question is, what is one thing that you are going to do today to treat yourself? Something nice that you're gonna do for yourself. Something to relax or calm down, or just something that brings you joy. So.
All right, so that concludes the video. I'm going to give you another couple of minutes to respond to these questions if you hadn't thought about them already. So the questions are, what are the norms or expectations established by the teacher? What strategies does the teacher use to help students feel comfortable sharing in the circle? So take a couple of minutes. Again, I'm going to play some music and give you time to reflect on those questions. All right, go ahead and wrap up what you're writing. So I'm going to recap everything that happened in the video, or the most important practices that you saw in the video. As far as the norms and expectations that were established, these were the norms that I used for my circle. What's said in the circle stays in the circle, speak from the heart, stay muted while others are sharing, challenge by choice. So these are just norms that I use. I recommend using at least what's said in the circle stays in the circle, because that one is important for students to feel like it is a safe space and to help them feel comfortable sharing. But as far as the other ones, there's leeway for you guys to choose your own norms based on your relationship with your kids and what you want circles to look like in your classroom. The next question was, what strategies does the teacher use to help students feel comfortable sharing? So this is one of the most common things that teachers say about circles in the beginning of the year is that their students are not sharing. And I suspect that with virtual learning, this will definitely be the case as we're trying to build brand new relationships with students without physically being in a classroom with them. And so there are some strategies that I used in this video to help students feel comfortable. I started and ended the circle with what we call low risk questions. So these are silly, goofy, funny questions that make students feel a little bit at ease because they're not likely to embarrass themselves with the answer, or they're not being asked to talk about something super personal or vulnerable. I also made sure that there was a predictable order of students that students shared in. So you wouldn't want to call students out randomly or use a randomizing wheel or some feature like that, because that can make students feel anxious instead of comfortable sharing. And then I also gave students time to write down their answers to some of the questions first. I especially recommend doing this with some of those deeper questions or more difficult questions to help students go over their answer first before having to speak right on the spot. And then another strategy that I used was answering the question first. So when I conduct a circle, I always answer first and then I pass it off to the next person. Thank you guys so much for watching this entire webinar. I hope that you found it useful. And what I want you guys to do next is create your own circle. So you will see a document titled Low Risk Circle Questions in the Robert T. Hill Google Classroom that we're using. And those questions, you're just going to see a PDF with tons of silly, goofy, easy questions that you can use to build community in the classroom and start to get to know your students. Step 2 would be opening the community meeting template that is also there in the Google Classroom. This template is going to show you step by step how to create your own circle. All you have to do is plug in your own questions and you guys are good to go. So again, thank you so much for watching. And if you guys need to reach out to me for any reason, if you have questions about restorative practices, social emotional learning in general, again, I'm Ellen Stroud, and I will be sending you guys an email with my information so you know how to contact me. Thanks, guys.